Why did she stand so far from the others? The morning sun spilled over Fort Clearwater like a cautious promise, its pale light catching on dust, kicked up by boots moving in uncertain formation. 32 recruits struggled across the parade ground, their movements clumsy, their uniforms stiff with newness. Staff Sergeant Isabella Morales stood at the edge of it all, her slight frame nearly swallowed by the shadow of the tall pines lining the training field. She didn't bark orders, didn't pace the lines like the other instructors. She simply watched. Her dark eyes tracked every nervous mistake, every untied boot, every glance of panic flickering in a young soldier's face. And yet there was something in her stillness that made even the other sergeants quiet down a little when she was near. None of the recruits knew who she was. None of them could have guessed what she had done. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Private Connor Blake noticed her first. He was hard to miss himself, 6'2", broad shoulders that once carried the weight of college football pads, and the kind of square jaw that made people assume he'd be in charge someday. His uniform looked like it had been ironed by angels, his boots catching the light like mirrors. Blake moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been second best at anything, and he wasn't about to start now. "Look at this place," Blake muttered under his breath, his voice just loud enough for the private next to him to hear. Nathan Cross, skinny, wide-eyed, eager to latch onto someone stronger, nodded instantly. "Half these instructors look like they've never seen real action," Blake added. His eyes landed on Isabella, standing alone. "That one?" She probably spent her career pushing papers in some office. Cross followed his gaze. From where they stood, she looked ordinary, too small, too quiet. "She doesn't look like much," Cross agreed. "Probably promoted because someone needed to fill a quota." Blake smirked. He'd already made up his mind. In his world, the military had only 3 kinds of people: the has-beens, the never-were, and the few worth learning from. Staff Sergeant Morales? He decided she belonged in the second category. Master Sergeant Daniel Foster watched the recruits too. He'd been at Fort Clearwater for 8 years. He'd seen hundreds of instructors come and go, but none like her. His eyes drifted toward Isabella, something close to reverence in his expression. "New batch looks promising," he murmured as he stepped closer to her. "Though that tall one in the front, he might be trouble. He's got that look." Isabella's lips curved into something that almost looked like a smile. "Private Blake," she said quietly. "I've read his file. Top of his OCS class." Foster added, "College athlete. Comes from a military family. He's used to being the best at everything he does. He's not going to take kindly to being told what to do by anyone he thinks is beneath him." "No," she said softly. "Eyes never leaving the formation. He's not." The day dragged through the usual routine: medical checks, endless paperwork, gear handouts that felt like a scavenger hunt in olive drab. Through it all, Isabella stayed quiet, efficient, a name on a clipboard, a steady hand keeping 32 confused recruits from scattering like startled birds. Most didn't notice her at all. Blake noticed, but not the way Foster did. To him, she was just another cog in the machine, a woman with nothing to teach him. "She's quiet," Private Jessica Parker said at lunch, her voice carrying curiosity, not judgment. "Quiet because she's got nothing to say." Blake shot back. He didn't look up from his tray, but Parker's eyes stayed on Isabella, who stood in the distance, speaking softly to another sergeant. Something about her didn't fit the box Blake had shoved her in. The way other NCOs deferred to her, the way the captain seemed to treat her. Not like a subordinate, more like an advisor. But Blake didn't notice those things. He wasn't looking for them. As the sun sank, Blake leaned back on his bunk, arms behind his head. He felt good, confident. He'd figured this place out already. The instructors, the rhythms, the expectations, even that quiet sergeant standing by the tree line. She was no mystery. Not to him. Across the base, Isabella sat at a small kitchen table, the light above her buzzing faintly. A stack of recruit files lay open in front of her. She read every word. She always did. When she reached Blake's file, she paused. It told a familiar story. Someone who had succeeded on talent and confidence alone. Someone who had never truly been tested. She exhaled slowly. She'd seen dozens like him, and she knew the truth they always learned. The hard way. Real strength isn't loud. It isn't obvious. And it doesn't demand to be seen. It simply shows up. Tomorrow, she thought, he'll start to learn whether he wants to or not. Why was she faster than him? The 050 wake-up call came like a thunderclap, rattling the thin walls of the barracks and jarring 32 recruits out of uneasy dreams. Connor Blake wasn't one of them. He was already awake. He always was. He'd trained himself at officer candidate school to be up before reveille, to take pride in being ready before the rest even opened their eyes. It wasn't just discipline. It was a statement. He would always be 2 steps ahead, or so he thought. By the time the others stumbled into their boots, Blake was standing at the door, laces tight, uniform sharp enough to cut. He caught a glimpse of them, fumbling, bleary, half asleep, and couldn't help the smirk that curled his mouth. These weren't his peers. They were placeholders, temporary companions on his way to greater things. Move it! Move it! Move it! Master Sergeant Foster's voice rang through the barracks, but it wasn't the scream Blake expected from the drill sergeants he'd seen in movies. It was calm, firm, professional. Another sign. Blake thought that this place was softer than he'd imagined. Outside, the recruits formed up in the gray pre-dawn. Isabella was there, standing off to the side again, clipboard in hand, watching, always watching. Blake positioned himself in the front row, posture perfect. He didn't miss the subtle glances from the others. They already saw him as a leader. Good. They should. But then the fitness test started. Push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run. Basic stuff. Nothing he couldn't dominate. At least, that's what he assumed. Sergeant Morales, Foster called. Show them proper push-up form. Blake watched with mild curiosity as she stepped forward. Small and quiet, barely 5'4". This should be easy, he thought. A basic demo. A dozen push-ups, maybe 20, nothing special. But she dropped into position and didn't stop. Her form was flawless, her breathing controlled. 50 perfect push-ups. Not a pause, not a falter. Just an unbroken rhythm, like her body had been built for this. Holy shit, Cross whispered beside him. Blake's jaw tightened. She's been doing this for years, he muttered back, forcing a shrug. When you don't have anything else to focus on, you might as well stay in shape. Dismiss it. That's what he did. That's what he always did. But then came the sit-ups flawless. Again, her 2-mile run time? Faster than his personal best. That one stung. Maybe she's like a fitness specialist, Cross offered. Wiping sweat from his forehead as they lined up for water, Blake shook his head. Fitness is the easy part, he said, though his tone lacked its usual steel. Anyone can get in shape if they've got nothing better to do. The real test is leadership under pressure. Tactical thinking, decision-making. He said it like he believed it, almost, as if on cue. The afternoon brought tactical exercises. Blake's comfort zone. They split into squads, handed radios and maps, and given a scenario. Navigate obstacles, adapt to enemy contact, and hit objectives fast. This, Blake thought, was where he would shine. He slipped into the role of squad leader without being asked, his voice commanding, his plan clear. He knew exactly how to look in control. And for a while it worked. His squad performed well. They hit their targets. No one got killed. But when the exercise ended, Isabella approached. Not loudly, not with fanfare, just a quiet presence that seemed to shrink the noise around her. Private Blake, she said evenly. Walk me through your decision-making process. He blinked. His Squad had done fine, better than fine. Why was she dissecting it? He explained his plan, his route, his choices. But she didn't just nod and move on. She questioned him. Every assumption, every shortcut, every moment he decided without thinking too deeply. Your squad completed all objectives, she said. Finally, her tone was steady, neither praise nor criticism. But you made several decisions that could have been dangerous. Do you see them? Blake felt heat rising in his chest. Dangerous? They'd won. They'd done better than anyone else. I'm not sure what you mean, Sergeant, he said, a sharpness creeping into his voice. We hit every goal. No one failed. Her eyes stayed on him. Calm, steady. You did, she said softly. But effectiveness isn't just about checking boxes. It's about understanding what those choices would mean if this wasn't a game. The debrief lasted 10 minutes. 10 long minutes. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just asked questions. The kind that worm into your head and don't leave. By the time it ended, Blake walked away feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Unsteady, doubtful, almost exposed, cross-caught. Up to him as they headed back. What was that about? You crushed it out there. Blake nodded absently, but her questions kept echoing. He was used to feedback. The simple kind. Praise for success. Criticism for failure. This was different. It felt like she had seen straight through him, through his posture, his confidence, his perfect boots, straight into the gaps. That night, in the barracks, Blake leaned back on his bunk. He could hear the others whispering, laughing, already telling stories about the day, but his mind kept circling the same thought. She'd made him question himself, without raising her voice once. He hated that more than he wanted to admit across base. Isabella sat alone again, her lamp casting soft light over another stack of files. She wrote in neat, controlled lines, her pen moving faster when she reached Blake's name. She wasn't writing about his mistakes. She was writing about his potential, because she saw something in him, something he hadn't seen in himself, not yet. Why did she shoot like that? The next morning began with the smell of gun oil and the sharp, metallic promise of the firing range. For Gunner Blake, this was sacred ground. He'd grown up with rifles, hunting trips with his father, summer afternoons. At the range in college, this finally was where he would own the day. He held the M4 carbine like it belonged to him, because it did, or so he believed. The recruits lined up under a pale sky. The air felt taut, like it was holding its breath. Isabella stood off to the side again, silent, her clipboard tucked under one arm. Watching, always watching. The safety briefing was straightforward, her voice calm, measured, every word landing. With quiet authority, Blake half listened. Confident, he already knew everything she was saying. He'd heard it before. He didn't need to hear it again. Targets were set. Magazines were loaded. This was his arena. He stepped to the line, stance sharp, movements confident. His shots were good. Not perfect, but good. Respectable groupings. Clean form. He nodded to himself. Exactly what he expected. Then it was her turn. Sergeant Morale's demo, Foster called. She stepped forward. Calm, almost casual. 20 rounds, 300 meters. Not one stray shot. The grouping so tight it looked like someone had punched a hole clean through the center of the target. The range went still. Even the recruits who didn't know enough to be impressed knew enough to stare. Jesus, Cross muttered, his voice low. Where did she learn to shoot like that? Blake swallowed. She probably spends all her free time on the range, he said, forcing a shrug. When you don't have anything else going on, you practice. But the excuse felt thin. Even as he said it, the afternoon dragged into individual. Coaching, Blake expected the usual instructors correcting grips, adjusting elbows, telling shaky recruits to breathe. What he didn't expect was the way she moved. She didn't just watch, she saw. She'd glance at someone's stance, tilt her head slightly, and say one word, left foot, or relax your wrist. And within seconds, their shots tightened, improved, landed. Rodriguez, who'd been struggling all morning, stared at his own target in disbelief. "How did you know to adjust my grip like that?" he asked. "I've been missing for weeks." "Experience," Isabella said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." Blake clenched his jaw. It wasn't that she was skilled. He could accept that. It was that she saw things he didn't, things he couldn't. When she came to him, he braced himself. Her corrections were quiet, precise. One slight shift in his elbow, a note about his trigger discipline. Small things, but the shots landed cleaner after each one. And somehow, that didn't feel like help. It felt like being exposed. He muttered something about the sun glare. Something about the range setup. Anything to explain why her words had made a difference. But deep down, he knew she wasn't lucky. She wasn't just a range rat. She was better. And he hated that thought. By late afternoon, the smell of spent rounds clung to their uniforms as they transitioned into tactical movement drills. Urban scenarios, cover, and concealment. Fast decisions under pressure. Blake perked up. This was it. This was where his OCS training, his real training, would show. His performance? Solid, calculated, successful, until she ran the course. If her shooting had been mechanical precision, her movement was something else entirely. She flowed. That was the only word for it. Every step deliberate. Every pause calculated. Every corner cleared like she'd been doing it forever. Not on a training range, but somewhere it mattered. Cross whispered, "Where the hell did she learn to move like that?" Blake's mouth was dry. "It's just practice," he muttered. But the words rang hollow. He watched as she moved, and for the first time, he felt something he didn't like. Not irritation, not even envy. Something closer to fear, because she wasn't just good. She was operating on a level he didn't even know existed. When the after-action debrief began, she was the same as always, calm, professional, voice even. But when it was his turn, her questions cut again. "Why did you take that route?" he explained. "And why that angle of cover?" He justified. Every answer felt weaker as she peeled them apart, layer by layer, until even his own reasoning started to sound flimsy to his ears. She never said he was wrong, never raised her voice. She just kept asking. By the end, he walked away with the same gnawing feeling as the day before. Not humiliated, not broken, but unsettled. Like he was standing on ground that wasn't as solid as he thought. That night, he told Cross, "She's been doing these exercises for years. It's muscle memory, that's all." He said it like it was truth, but the words felt thinner every time he used them. Across base, Isabella wrote her notes again, her pen scratching steady lines under his name. She wasn't trying to break him. She was testing him, pushing, just enough, waiting for the moment he might finally start to see. Why did her silence feel heavier than his mistake? The morning of the field exercise carried a different weight. The recruits could feel it in the clipped tone of the briefing, the sudden shift from routine drills to something that felt closer to reality. They were heading into the woods, 3 days, simulated operations. No barracks, no comfort, no hiding. Blake's pulse quickened. Finally, this was the kind of scenario that separated leaders from followers. Captain Hayes laid out the rules. 2 teams, 2 missions, objectives to achieve, enemy patrols to avoid. Success measured not just by completion, but by decisions under pressure. Blake barely heard the rest. He'd been tapped as team leader for Team Alpha. Of course he had. It wasn't even a surprise. When the roster was read, his name was followed by the one he least expected. Team Alpha will be evaluated by Staff Sergeant Morales. His smile faltered. Just for a second, Cross leaned in. "Guess we're stuck with her." Blake forced a smirk. "Training wheels instructor," he muttered. Great. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, Was that Captain Hayes? Hadn't chosen Isabella by accident. She'd been assigned to him specifically, not because he needed a babysitter, but because his greatest strength, his confidence, was already showing signs of turning into his greatest liability. The team moved out at dawn. The forest swallowed them. Every sound felt amplified. Boots on leaves, radios crackling softly. The occasional nervous cough from a recruit in the back. Blake's voice stayed steady. He briefed them clearly. He made decisions quickly. He looked, from the outside, like the kind of leader he believed himself to be. Their mission: set up a concealed observation post, gather intel on enemy positions, report back, all without being detected. For 6 hours, it worked. They moved smoothly, found a good perch, began their watch. Blake felt the familiar rush of being right. Then, the world shifted. The enemy patrol patterns changed. Suddenly, the secure spot they'd settled into wasn't so secure. The simulation's rules meant discovery wouldn't mean real danger. But it would mean failure. Private Parker's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "Sir, we might need to relocate. This position's getting exposed." Blake felt a flash of irritation. Relocate? They'd spent hours digging in, camouflaging, setting up the gear. Moving would mean admitting his original call wasn't good enough. "We're staying," he said firmly. "We've got cover here. Moving now would risk detection." He felt her eyes on him then. From a few feet away, Isabella stood silent, watching, not interfering, just writing something in that ever-present notebook. 3 more hours passed. The patrols drew closer. "Too close. Sir, we have to move," Private Rodriguez urged. "We'll get spotted if we stay." Blake's jaw tightened. His mind screamed 2 truths at once. "We need to move. I can't admit I was wrong." And then her voice cut the air soft, even. "Private Blake, a word?" He followed her away from the group, 50 meters into the trees. They stood in the filtered light. Just the two of them. "What's your assessment of the current situation?" she asked, neutral, calm. "We're fine," he said quickly. "We have concealment. Moving now would be risky." Her head tilted slightly. "And if the patrol pattern continues to shift toward your position, we'll deal with that when it happens," he said, sharper now. "You can't make decisions based on what might happen." She didn't flinch. "Leadership isn't about being right all the time," she said softly. "It's about making the best choice with the information you have and adapting when the information changes." Her words hung there, heavy, like a stone he didn't want to pick up. He argued, not loudly, but stubbornly, and she just kept asking, questions that cut deeper each time. By the end, he knew the truth. They had to move, but the admission lodged in his throat like a blade. Back with the team, his voice didn't carry its usual force when he finally said, "We're moving. Pack it up." No one reacted much. No one sneered or whispered or even seemed to think twice. But to Blake, it felt like a fracture, because they didn't know why he'd changed his mind. But he knew he hadn't chosen to adapt. He'd been pushed. And he hated how that felt. The relocation went smoothly. They settled in again. The mission moved forward. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. The exercise was still a success. But inside, Blake's confidence, the kind that had always been his armor, felt thinner. That night, as the team sat around the low campfire, Parker handed out MREs and Cross muttered about the cold. Blake stayed quiet. He couldn't stop replaying the moment she pulled him aside. The way she hadn't yelled, the way she hadn't ordered, the way she just asked questions until he realized he was wrong and had to change course. That silence weighed more than shouting ever could. Later, when Cross asked, "What did she say to you?" Blake shrugged. "She just wants to feel useful," he muttered, probably trying to prove something. The words sounded bitter, even to him, across the camp. Isabella wrote by the light of a small lantern, her handwriting steady. Blake's name. Again, notes again, not harsh, not condemning, just watchful, because she saw it now. The first crack small, but there ... and she knew what it meant. The lesson was beginning. Why did every answer feel like the wrong one? By the second morning in the field, Blake's pride was still bruised from the previous day's relocation. He told himself it was nothing, just a tactical adjustment. Happens to every leader. But deep down, the memory stuck. The way she had pulled him aside, asked those quiet questions, made him see his own mistake. He hated how easily she'd done it. So today, he would take back control. The mission was more complex. Infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, gather intel, extract without detection. Exactly the kind of operation that demanded sharp planning and decisive leadership. Blake delivered his briefing like a performance. He spread the map on a crate, tapped routes with his finger, spoke with crisp confidence. He saw the nods from his team, even from Parker, who always seemed to watch him a little too closely. This was what he was good at. When he finished, Isabella just stood there. Expression neutral, no smile, no frown, just that steady, unreadable gaze. Any questions? Blake asked the team. Parker raised her hand hesitantly. What if the enemy patrol schedule changes again? Shouldn't we build in more flexibility? Blake felt irritation flash hot in his chest. Flexibility had been what got him corrected yesterday. Not today. The plan accounts for variations, he said tightly. If we keep second-guessing every detail, we won't execute anything. But, Parker started. Trust the plan, he cut in. His voice had that edge. The one that said the discussion was over. Isabella didn't say a word. She just wrote something in her notebook. It drove him crazy. When they stepped off, his confidence felt restored. The team moved well. They reached their approach route on time. Everything felt right again. But then little things began to shift. The enemy had changed security patterns. Patrols were tighter. Checkpoints were in new spots. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to throw shadows over his carefully drawn map lines. Sir, Private Rodriguez murmured as they crouched behind a ridge. The checkpoint up ahead wasn't on the intel. Should we reroute? Blake hesitated, just for a breath, then shook his head. We stick to the plan. Deviating creates more risk. He felt her presence before he saw her. Isabella moved like the forest belonged to her. Silent, effortless, she appeared beside him, low to the ground, eyes scanning the terrain. Private Blake, she said softly. What's your assessment of the situation? He didn't look at her. We're fine, he said. Minor variations, nothing significant. And if those variations suggest the enemy is adapting? They don't, he snapped before he could stop himself. It's just a checkpoint, her head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing, not with anger, not even disapproval, with curiosity. Are you certain? She asked. 2 words. That was all it took to rattle him, because he wasn't certain. But he couldn't admit that. They moved on. The mission succeeded. Technically, the team completed every objective. But by the time they regrouped, his confidence felt thinner, not because he'd failed, because every time she'd asked a question, he'd felt that same gnawing doubt. It wasn't that she was undermining him. It was that she was making him see gaps he didn't want to see. When the debrief came, she didn't even raise her voice. She never did. Your team achieved all objectives, she said evenly. But I'm concerned about your decision-making. Blake forced a smile. I believe in decisive leadership, he replied. Second-guessing every change is paralysis. She didn't smile back. And ignoring changes because they don't fit your plan? Her voice was soft, but the question hit like a hammer. The conversation went on for half an hour. Her calm voice, his forced answers, each one feeling more hollow. By the end, his jaw ached from clenching. That night, back at the bivouac, he vented. To Cross, his voice low, bitter. She's got it in for me, he muttered. Keeps poking holes in everything. Some people can't handle seeing someone with real potential succeed. Cross nodded. but didn't look convinced. Even he had started to notice something. It wasn't that she was trying to embarrass Blake. It wasn't that she was looking for failure. It was that she seemed to be teaching, but not in the way Blake understood teaching. Not with lectures, not with orders, with questions. Questions that stripped him down, layer by layer, until even his own voice didn't sound as sure anymore, and he hated that across the camp. Isabella sat under the faint light of a lantern, pen scratching. Her notes were as steady as her voice had been. She didn't write about his mistakes. She wrote about his walls and how to take them down, gently but unrelentingly. Why did everyone defer to her? By the third day in the field, Connor Blake's world had shifted in ways he didn't want to admit. On paper, everything was fine. His team had completed every objective. No failures, no major missteps, but inside, every success felt thin, because behind every good call, there were her questions, her quiet voice asking if he'd thought of this, her head tilt, as if she already knew the answer he didn't. It was like she could see through him, and worse, she wasn't the only one. They were deep in prep for the final mission when he noticed it. Master Sergeant Foster walked over to Isabella, holding a map. He didn't just hand it off. He asked. Something about routes, adjustments, like her opinion carried more weight than his. Then Captain Hayes appeared, the company commander herself. She spoke with Isabella in low tones, her face serious, her hand brushing across the map as Isabella pointed out something with her pen. Hayes nodded, not curtly, not dismissively. She nodded like a student. Blake felt his chest tighten. Why were they looking at her like that? He didn't say anything, but he saw how Foster's voice softened when he asked her things. Saw how Hayes didn't just check in. She listened. It didn't make sense. She was a staff sergeant, and he was supposed to be the one on the rise. That evening, during a rare pause, he finally blurted it out to Cross. Why does everyone act like she's different? Cross shrugged, but even he looked uneasy. Maybe she's just been here a long time? No, Blake said sharply. It's more than that, because he'd seen it in their eyes, something closer to respect, and it gnawed at him the final. Mission briefing came at dusk, under a dim sky that made every shadow seem longer. Blake stood with his team, laying out the plan again. Another tight operation. Multi-phase, infiltration, intel grab, clean extraction. He hit every detail, every timing, every contingency he could think of. When he finished, Isabella didn't comment, didn't critique. She just asked one question. What's your response if you encounter indirect fire? Blake blinked. That won't happen in this exercise, he said quickly. She didn't move, didn't blink. But if it did? He hesitated, irritation flickering across his face. Appropriate cover. Continue mission. She didn't look impressed. Another quiet note went into her notebook. More questions followed. Not aggressive, just relentless. What if the enemy response isn't just fire, but coordinated fire and ground movement? What if they're not just blocking, but baiting? Each one chipped away at his certainty. This wasn't how training was supposed to go. Training was supposed to be about drills. Checklists, steps. Not this. Whatever this was, her questions weren't for the exercise. They felt real, too real. By the time she stopped, Blake's plan felt smaller, like paper in a storm. He went through the motions anyway, delivered the same confident speech to his team, but something was missing, because every time he looked up, she was there, standing, off to the side, watching with that expression, not judgment, not approval, something else. And when he turned away, he caught sight of Master Sergeant Foster again, talking to her in low tones, nodding like whatever she said mattered. It made his stomach nod. That night, as the recruits settled into bivouac for the final time, Blake sat apart, staring at the ground. Cross wandered over. She's in your head, he said quietly. Blake looked up sharply. No, she's not. But the words felt hollow, because maybe she was, across camp, Isabella sat by the faint glow of her lantern. Foster approached, crouched down beside her. Their voices were low, too soft for anyone else to catch more than fragments. The general's visit. You sure you're ready for this? Been 18 months? Blake caught pieces, enough to twist in his mind. General's visit? Ready for what? He couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the cold, not because of the mission ahead, but because of one thought that wouldn't leave. She wasn't just an instructor. She was something else. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to know what. Why was a general coming here? For her? The forest was gray with dawn when the radio crackled. Captain Hayes' voice was steady, but different somehow. Team leaders, stand by. Command has new information. Connor Blake stood up straighter, brushing dirt off his uniform. He didn't know why, but those words felt heavier than the usual exercise updates. Within the hour, word spread across the training grounds like smoke. A general was coming, not for an inspection, not for a ceremony. For her, Blake heard it in passing, half-whispered between two corporals hauling supplies. Yeah, Morales, she's the reason he's coming down here. Really? For a staff sergeant? She's not just any staff sergeant. The words clung to Blake's ribs. What did that even mean? Not just any staff sergeant. He cornered Cross later, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. What's the deal with this general thing? Why is he coming here? Cross shrugged, fiddling with the strap on his rucksack. Something about her record. I heard Foster say she hasn't been in front of brass like that since... Since what? Blake snapped. Cross hesitated. Since some mission. He didn't say which. He stopped talking when he saw me standing there. The unanswered question stuck in Blake's throat like glass. By mid-morning, the team was gearing up for the final mission, a culmination of everything: navigation, tactics, stealth, the kind of test that made or broke reputations. Blake forced his voice steady as he briefed the team. He saw nods, he saw trust, but he also saw Parker glance toward Isabella, as if looking for something beyond his words. It hit harder than it should have. When the briefing ended, Isabella stepped closer. Her presence alone shifted the air, made Blake's throat tighten. Private Blake, she said quietly, do you understand what this mission is meant to teach? He met her gaze, stiff. To execute under pressure, he said. To lead. Her eyes stayed on him, dark and unreadable. Or to learn, she said softly. Sometimes they're not the same thing. Then she walked away, leaving him standing there with a knot in his stomach. The mission began at 0600. The team moved out, radios low, packs heavy. Blake took point, barking hand signals, his confidence just a little too loud, like he was performing for someone invisible. The enemy presence was thicker now. More patrols, tighter zones, tripwires hidden under leaves. Each obstacle demanded a choice, and each choice felt like a test he wasn't sure he was passing. Behind him, Isabella's voice was quiet, but ever-present, not giving orders, not interfering, just asking, why that route? Why that timing? Why that assumption? Every question felt like a pinprick, tiny, but relentless. By midday, the team reached a crossroads. Literally, 2 routes forward, one direct. Faster, but exposed. The other longer, safer, but would cost them precious time. Blake crouched over the map, jaw tight. This is simple, he said. We go direct. Speed over everything. Parker frowned. Sir, that's open ground. If we're spotted, we won't be, he cut in. We don't have time for the long way. Trust the plan. No one argued further. They moved, but as they crossed that stretch of open ground, something felt wrong. The enemy spotted them. A simulation. But the kind that still stung. Alarms blared through radios. A voice crackling. Team Alpha compromised, mission integrity broken. The team dove for cover, scrambling. The exercise spiraling into chaos. Blake's pulse pounded. This wasn't catastrophic. The simulation would continue, but his call had been the wrong one, and worse. Everyone knew it. When the firefight ended and the radios went quiet, the forest held its breath. The team regrouped under cover. Mud streaked across. Faces in gear, Parker's voice was careful, but firm. "Sir, we should have taken the long route." Blake opened his mouth, to argue, to defend, to explain. But the words stuck, because they all knew the truth. He'd gambled on speed, and lost. Then Isabella stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't berate. She didn't even look angry. She just crouched in front of him, eyes steady. "What did you learn?" she asked. Not "why did you mess up?" Not "what were you thinking?" Just, "what did you learn?" The question hollowed him out, because he didn't have an answer that didn't taste like ash. The team moved on. The mission salvaged, but the damage was done. Not to his reputation, not yet, but to something deeper. That night, back at camp, the whispers about the general grew louder. Foster mentioned her name in low tones. Someone said the words, "Medal of Honor." Blake froze when he heard it. He didn't even know if it was true. It sounded insane, but it clung to him like smoke. Medal of Honor? For? He stared across the firelight at Isabella, sitting under the same quiet lantern glow, her pen moving in her notebook. She didn't look like someone with a chest full of medals. She didn't look like someone who had been that, but then she glanced up, and for the briefest moment, the barest flicker, her eyes held something heavy, something he couldn't name, and for the first time, he wondered if everything he thought he knew about her was wrong. Why did she move like she'd been here before? The final mission began in the half-light before dawn. The forest damp with dew and heavy with tension. This one wasn't like the others. The enemy force was larger. The objectives were tighter. The stakes, even simulated, felt different. Blake felt it in the way Captain Hayes delivered the briefing. He felt it in the way Foster's eyes flicked toward Isabella, and he felt it in his own chest, a pounding mix of pride, nerves, and something he wouldn't name. He told himself he was ready. He told himself he'd lead them perfectly this time, but his hands felt tighter on the map than they should have. The first half of the mission went smooth. His team moved like clockwork, quiet hand signals, clean sweeps, every checkpoint hit on time. Blake let himself believe it again. "I've got this." But then the second phase started. The enemy force shifted, suddenly, aggressively, unexpectedly. What was supposed to be a controlled drill turned messy. Patrols closed in from angles they hadn't seen before. Radio chatter spiked with static and tension. Blake's mind raced. Choices, routes, commands. He snapped orders, sharp, fast, confident, or at least they sounded confident. "Move left flank. Rodriguez, cover that gap. Cross, set the perimeter." The team obeyed, but the situation worsened. A simulated ambush hit, blanks and smoke, but disorienting, chaotic. The team faltered, and then Blake made the wrong call. It wasn't dramatic. Just a rushed decision, a direction that boxed them in, a command that left the rear open. The enemy surged. 2 casualties were called over the radio. Parker hit the ground, cursing, her gear marked with the bright tape they used for simulated wounds. The mission was spiraling. And Blake's voice, the voice that had always cut through chaos, cracked. "Fall back. Fall back." But the retreat was sloppy. They stumbled, confused, the simulation tipping toward failure. Through the smoke, he saw her, Isabella. She hadn't said a word all mission, just shadowed the team, watchful, silent. But now she moved, and the world seemed to shift around her. She stepped into the chaos like it wasn't chaos at all. No shouting, no panic, just precise, deliberate commands. 3 words at a time, calm as stone. Rodriguez. Left cover. Cross. Flank low. Parker. Breathe. Her voice cut through the smoke like light, and somehow they listened, even Blake. In less than 2 minutes, The tide turned. The team reformed. The objective was salvaged, and the enemy was forced back. When the radio finally crackled, mission complete. The forest went still. Blake stood there, breath ragged, sweat streaking dirt down his face. He'd been the leader, but she had saved the mission. And everyone knew it. No one said it out loud, but they didn't have to. Parker's glance toward Isabella. Rodriguez's nod. Even Cross, who always had Blake's back, looked at her differently now. And Blake felt something he hadn't felt. Since arriving at Fort Clearwater, small hours later, they stood on the parade ground. The mud was scrubbed from their gear, the smoke from the mission still clinging to the air. And then the black sedan pulled up. The general stepped out, 4 stars on his chest. His uniform so crisp it looked carved. The recruits straightened instinctively. Blake did too, but his eyes went straight to Isabella. She didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't smile. She just stood there, like she'd been here before. The general walked right past Hayes, right past Foster, and stopped in front of her. "Staff Sergeant Morales," he said, his voice heavy with something more than formality. "It's been a long time." She nodded once. "Sir." And then he saluted her. "Blake's?" Breath caught. The general saluted her. When he lowered his hand, he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Years ago, in Kandahar province, one soldier held a line that should have been impossible to hold. She did it alone. She saved everyone behind her. And she never asked for recognition. The recruits were silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. The general looked at her, his voice softening. They gave her the Medal of Honor. She didn't even come to the ceremony. Blake stared. He didn't understand. Not fully, not until now. All the questions, all the mystery, all the quiet. She hadn't been just quiet. She'd been carrying something too big for words that night. Long after the general had left and the recruits had been dismissed, Blake found her alone at the edge of the training field. She was looking at the tree line, as if the forest still held ghosts. He walked up slowly. He didn't even know what he was going to say until the words came out. "I thought you were weak." She didn't look at him. "Why?" "Because you were quiet." A long pause, the kind that made his chest ache. Then she finally turned, and her eyes, calm, steady, met his. "Quiet doesn't mean weak," she said softly. "It means we choose when to speak." She left him. With that, and walked away. The next morning, the recruits lined up for dismissal. Connor Blake stood in formation. Uniform straight, jaw tight, but he wasn't the same. He watched her in the distance, still small, still silent, still somehow larger than anyone else there. He didn't salute her. He didn't speak to her again. He just watched her walk away. And, for the first time, he understood. Real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't demand to be seen. It doesn't wear its medals for the world. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.